Hey there, it's Ian McTavish, and I'm just going over my ICS 3U course and ICS 4U course dealing with graphics. So I've created a WPF program here, and it has a dock panel in it, and it has a menu in there. And in the menu, I've got a heading where it's pick an item, and you'll notice the underscore. So if the person presses Alt-P, will pop open this menu, and because these menu items are inside of it, it'll drop down these items, and you will see I've got draw rectangle, red rectangle, etc., etc. And each of these have a click method, and some of them have shortcut keys. After my menu, I have a canvas. So that's the program. I'm going to quickly demonstrate it. So here's my main window, and pick an item, and you'll see when I hold down Alt, there's letter P, and I can pick. So I'm going to start with draw a rectangle. Very simple. It draws a blue rectangle. So the code for this is in my CS program, and I'm just going to hide these windows so that I can see it. So here's the draw rectangle. So in my XAML, my canvas was given it an X name of canvas. So I can refer to canvas, and what I'm doing is I'm clearing all the children. So the key thing is that as I run this program, if I select a different item, then it's going to clear the screen and do the new item. So it's a rectangle, I've given it a name, it's a blue rectangle, and the different properties. The fill determines what color. So brushes is an enumeration that allows me to select, it's a class, and I can select different colors based on the class, and I've got my width and height. And then this is when I actually add my rectangle to the canvas. So canvas.children are all the graphic elements on my canvas, and this is where I add it. And then I can set the top position, and this is tricky. Canvas, the capital C, this is a static method of the class, and basically it allows you to manipulate graphics and if you had multiple canvases. So it's a little confusing at first, but the idea is that I'm using this, and then I'm specifying what's the item that I'm moving and where am I setting the top to. So I'm setting it to the top 0, I'm setting it to the left, and that's it. Don't worry about this line right now. Once we get to the circles, you'll see the result. So that's the blue rectangle. Underneath that, I've got draw a red rectangle, and you'll see this one pulls it into the bottom corner. So very similar code for that, creating a rectangle, etc., adding the canvas. The difference is instead of setting the top and the left, I'm setting the bottom and the right. And that allows me to manipulate, I want it in the bottom, and how far off from the bottom it is. So it's a little confusing, but it allows me to reposition it. The next one, let me just demonstrate, is draw a circle. So here it's drawing a circle right in the center of the screen. Now I'm doing some tricky stuff here, and watch what happens. If I run draw a circle a second time, now it's going to draw a white circle, and a third time a black circle. And so I can click this and keep adding smaller and smaller circles. So I'm trying to show you some code to do some funky stuff. So the first thing that I'm doing is, remember I was setting that variable before, count circles, and that's a global variable up at the top. So in my circle thing, I'm checking, is my value less than or equal to 0? That means that I've got a rectangle on the screen or something else. So in that case, I'm going to clear the screen. Otherwise, I don't want to clear the screen because I want this layered circle effect. So a circle is actually a type of ellipse. So just like up here, even though I'm drawing a square, it's actually a type of rectangle. So an ellipse, I can set the width and height so I can make it look like a perfect circle if they're the same, and it will be an oval if they're not. So in here, now I'm checking, and that variable of where I'm counting the circles, it increases, so I'm checking modulus 2. So if I divide it by 2, what's the remainder? And if it's an even remainder, I'm going to set my fill to black, and if it's an odd remainder, it'll be set to white. Then I'm going to check the size of my canvas, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that my circle is perfectly centered in the canvas. So I'm checking, is the width greater than the height? In this case it is. So then my circle width is going to be the size of the canvas actual height, because that's the smaller value. Dividing it by 2 so that way it's going to be in there. And then I minus the count circles times 10. So each circle is going to be 10 pixels smaller than the previous one. And the first time count circles is 0, so it's just that height divided by 2. And then my width is the same as the height, so that I get a perfect circle. And down here, I'm just, if I resize my screen, and I'm just going to clear the screen to draw it, you'll notice that it automatically adjusts, because even though it's now kind of a portrait mode, it's modified. So that's all the logic to do that. I'm adding the circle, and then I'm setting the length. And this time I want to find the halfway point of the canvas and subtract half of the width of the circle, so that way it centers it. And that's where I'm increasing my circles. So the circle one's a little tricky, but I wanted to show you some different effects with that. Now, the next one, draw a checkerboard. Draw a checkerboard allows me to create a checkerboard, and all this is squares. So what I'm doing here is same logic that I had before with my circle. I'm checking, is it kind of portrait mode or landscape mode, so I'm setting my height based on which is the smaller one, so that it will fit perfectly. And then I'm looping. I've got rows and I've got columns, and a checkerboard is 8 by 8, so I'm doing a nested loop to deal with that. Within the loop, I'm going to create a rectangle, and then I'm checking, so I'm taking the row plus the column, and that will give me a number. And if you think of that, this top left one is 0, 0, so my value is 0. This one is 0 plus 1, so that's 1. This one, 0 plus 2, so it's 2. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now this one is going to be 1, 0. So that's going to be 1. So that's why even and odd, and that's how I'm going to get that checkerboard effect. I've picked black and red. I set my width based on the square width that I calculated earlier. My height, the same thing. I add it, I position it based on which column am I on, multiplied by the width, so that will move it over appropriately. Same with the top. So that's that. Now the next one is going to be funky. Draw funky. And the draw funky, I've got a whole bunch of different stuff. And the key thing is each time it's randomized, and you'll see there's different colors, and there's also gradients. So there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm showing you how to do here. So canvas, so I'm clearing the canvas, and I've got my random number generator, and I'm going to pick a random number of values from 5 to 20. Now I'm going to loop, and I'm just realizing I'm looping 8 times no matter what. I want to change that. I've made a mistake with my program. So let me just make that change. Number of items. I wondered why I always had 8 circles. So I'm going to always use an ellipse in this particular thing. And this is where it gets tricky. What I'm doing is I'm picking the next random number out of 10, and I'm modulusing it by 10. And what I'm looking for is it less than or equal to 8. So this will give me an 80% chance that I'm going to use a fill, which is a solid color. Now, I wanted to be able to pick a random color, so this is how I create a random color. The solid color brush allows me to pick a value based on a color. And the color command I can do from ARGB. So this is from the alpha, the red, the green, the blue. And I need to provide 4 values that are bytes. So a byte is an integer between 0 and 255. So my alpha value, I'm creating an integer that's a minimum 120 and a maximum of 255. So alpha is how transparent it is. So if it's 255, it's going to be a solid color. If If it's 120, it's going to be halfway transparent. I didn't bother going less than that because I want to be able to see the circles. The next value is going to be my red. So I'm picking a value of red from 0, which means no red, to 255, which is full red. Same thing for green. This time I'm picking a value halfway through, and same thing for blue. And the reason I'm picking the halfway through is that I was playing around with some different colors and stuff, and I like it's kind of Easter right now, so I like the color range that we're getting at this time of year. And it looks kind of Easter colors to me, so that's why I picked it. Oh, now, if 80% chance, that's my if, that I'm going to use a solid color. The 20% is where I'm going to create a linear gradient. So a linear gradient, and there's other types of gradient brushes you can explore, basically allows me to set different stops, and I can specify different colors. So I've picked the first stop is yellow, and it's at 0.0. The next stop's orange, 0.5, and the next stop's red, 1.0. If I change this to 0.25, what will happen is that will change the way that gradient goes. You can see the gradient there. It goes red much faster now. You can see it starts with yellow, but it goes much faster to red. And same thing, if I change that to 0.75, it will just change at what point does it switch from yellow to orange, and now it's going to take a much longer time, so it's more yellow most of the time. Now these are linear. You can obviously apply different values. So I can set my brush based on that. So this is a way to add funky colors, and I can set my position, and here I'm using a random position to determine where it goes, and I'm adding it, and I'm setting the left. So this logic here will force all of my ellipses to be fitting within the canvas. Next one. So, whoops. So the next option in my program is lines. I've drawn two lines, one a straight green line and two a curved blue line. And I'm just going to show you how to do that. So the straight line is really fairly easy to understand. You've got a line, you set the stroke, which is the color that the line's going to be. You can set the thickness, and stroke with things we've been using fills. So if you have a shape, you can set the fill, which is the inside color, and the stroke is the outside color. So you can set that for other things too. Now here, for a line, I set x1, x2, y1, y2. So these are my starting points. x1 and y1 is where it starts. The x and y coordinates for where it starts. x2 and y2 is where it ends. So you can see I'm starting mine at the left-hand side and ending on the right-hand side. And my y value, I'm at the halfway mark of my screen, my canvas. So I add my canvas. The green one is easy. The curved blue one is a little trickier. So what I'm doing for the blue one is I'm creating a path. And so I'm setting my stroke and the thickness, and I just realized that I've then changed my stroke to deep sky blue. So I'm realizing I've added some code here that I got to fix the code, but I'll explain it anyways. So I've got my stroke, got my thickness. You can see I was trying to troubleshoot some stuff as I worked along here. So within my path, then I need a geometry. So path geometry is what I've created. I also need a figure collection, and then a path figure. So my path figure starting point. So this is the starting point for that curved line. And then I've got a path segment collection. So this is where it's tricky. There's a lot of separate parts to this. So the segment collection allows me to set segments. So I'm using a Bezier curve. And the curve basically allows me to set 3 points. And there's point 1, point 2, point 3. And you can see, so my curve is 100, 0, 200, 200, and 300, 100. And those 3 values you'll see with the curved line that allow me to create this shape. And Bezier curves allow you to change how things look. So if I change my y to a 0 here, watch how the line changes. So I click lines, and now you can see it's changing the path that's following. So Bezier curve is basically kind of, here's my starting point and end point, and I will need to go through this this value with a curve. So I'm just going to change this one to 0. Now my x value for my midpoint is 0, and you can see there's a lot of stuff on Wikipedia that you can use to understand how Bezier curves work. I just wanted to give you an example. You can add it, then the path figure, the segments need to, so I'm adding the Bezier segments to my path segment collection. That path segment collection becomes the segments of my path figure. My path figure gets added to my figure collection. My figure collection is going to be set to be the figures for my geometry. My geometry is going to be the data for my curved line. My curved line is now going to be added to the canvas. Whew, exhausting, but that draws that line. Last one. The last one is text, and there's my draw text. And what I've done is I've drawn text that is rotated, and there's my string, so that's the text. I'm going to create a label, and I'm going to set the font family of the label, and this will only be Times New Roman if I actually have a Times New Roman font, and I'm not going to worry about showing you how to get what fonts are on the computer and stuff. That's something for another day. You can set the weight, you can set the size, you can set what color it's going to be, and then for the label you set the content. So we've dealt with labels and stack panels. So the reason we're doing it on the canvas is now we can do things and we can apply transformations. So the dot layout transform allows me to use a transform. There's a lot of different transformations. I'm picking the rotate transform, but if you look up documentation on MSDN, you can see that there is something like the translate transform, which allows you to reposition it and stuff. So this will rotate at -45 degrees. That adds it to the canvas, that positions it on the canvas. So there's a lot of stuff. This is on my GitHub, and I'll share the link for that. Take advantage of it, and hope you've learned a few programming tips for doing graphics in a WPF program in C#.